Battle of Edgehill. The battle that should have ended the war. What happens when a king who believes he's chosen by God faces off against his own people who believe God wants him gone? How did a 22-year-old prince with a barking poodle nearly win a war in one afternoon, only to lose it chasing wagons? Why did two exhausted armies, soaked in blood and frost, suddenly stop fighting as if someone had hit pause on history? And if you think the king marched on London after this, think again. So grab your cloak, saddle your horse, and prepare to ride into the fog of war. Now let's dive in. Once upon a time, in the land of roast beef and rigid monarchs, England was ruled by Charles I, a man so convinced of his divine right to rule that he made Zeus look like a constitutional moderate. Charles believed the Church of England should remain a centralized, ceremonial fortress of incense and hierarchy. But his subjects, many of whom were Puritans with a taste for plain churches and fiery sermons, had other ideas. Add to this a parliament that wanted more say in governance, a population itching for religious reform, and merchants demanding freer trade, and you had a recipe for rebellion. Charles, ever the immovable object, responded with the grace of a brick wall. "I alone must answer to God," he declared. Translation: no, you may not have a say in anything. Ever. In 1639, Scotland didn't just stir, it roared. The nation, fiercely Presbyterian and proudly defiant, rose as one to sign the National Covenant, a document so charged with religious fervor it might as well have been written in lightning. The Scots were fed up. 30 years earlier, James I had imposed bishops on their church, trying to mold their worship into something more Anglican, more English, more royal. But the Scots weren't having it. They threw out the bishops like bad haggis and declared their kirk free from episcopal meddling. This wasn't just a theological tantrum, it was a declaration of war. The Covenanters, as they came to be known, formed an army to defend their faith, and so began the Bishops' Wars. Two short, relatively bloodless conflicts that would prove a catastrophic embarrassment for King Charles I. Charles, ever confident in England's historic dominance over Scotland, cobbled together an army and marched north. What he got was the Battle of Newburn, a half-hearted skirmish where his troops were routed by the disciplined, passionate Scots. The Army of the Covenant didn't just win, they occupied Newcastle, England's coal heartland, and demanded payment for their trouble. Charles was stunned. England had triumphed in every major conflict with Scotland for centuries. But now his treasury was empty, his pride was bruised, and his enemies were sipping ale in Newcastle. The cost of war was ruinous. Charles had no money, no allies, and no choice. He was forced to do the one thing he'd avoided for 11 years, recall Parliament. He needed funds to pay the Scots and rebuild his shattered military. But Parliament wasn't in a forgiving mood. They handed him the Grand Remonstrance, a laundry list of grievances, from illegal taxes to monopolies, and a bold claim: Parliament, not the king, should control the army. Charles, who believed in the divine right of kings, saw red. Then came Ireland. In 1641, native Catholics launched brutal attacks on Protestant settlers. The violence was horrifying, and the question of who would raise and command the army to respond became urgent. Parliament wanted control. Charles refused. The tension snapped when Charles tried to arrest 5 leading MPs: Pym, Hollis, Hampden, Hazelrig, and Strode. It was a coup attempt, and it failed spectacularly. The London mob rose in fury, backing Parliament. Charles had played his last card and lost. Now pause for a sec, join the front lines of history and power. Welcome to European Battle, where epic clashes, legendary warriors, and untold stories come alive. By subscribing and turning on notifications, you're not just joining a channel, you're stepping into a world of thrilling battles. From ancient empires to modern warfare, we deliver cinematic storytelling, expert insights, and exclusive content that will leave you breathless. Don't just watch history, live it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a moment of the action. European Battle, where legends clash. So after failed negotiations, Charles raised his royal standard in Nottingham, effectively declaring war on his own people. The English Civil War had begun. In the England 1642, finding proper cuirassier armor, the heavy steel plating worn by elite cavalry, was like trying to buy Gucci in a potato famine. Horses strong enough to bear such armored riders were equally scarce. But Prince Rupert of the Rhine, the king's 23-year-old nephew, wasn't one to let logistics ruin a good war. Appointed commander of the royalist cavalry, Rupert trained his lightly armed horsemen to charge like they were armored knights, reckless, fast, and devastating. Cavalry was still the battlefield's prima donna, a leftover from the age of chivalry. But unlike the disciplined infantry, these horsemen had a flair for drama and a tendency to wander off mid-battle in pursuit of loot or glory. The term cavalier, once a neutral label, soon became synonymous with dashing, flamboyant, and occasionally unhinged warriors who fought with style and swagger. Rupert readied this perfectly. He was young, handsome, and brave, and he rode into battle with his white poodle named Boy, who barked heroically at enemy muskets. The dog was rumored to be a witch in disguise, because obviously if you're losing to a man with a barking poodle, something supernatural must be afoot. Artillery in 1642 was like a drunk uncle at a wedding, loud, hard to move, and not very helpful. Cannons fired smooth iron balls, which didn't explode but tore through bodies with horrifying force. They were invaluable in sieges, where you had time to set them up and reload. But in open battle, they were slow, cumbersome, and about as accurate as a blindfolded archer on a trampoline. At Edgehill, the first major battle of the war, cannons were scattered among the infantry and fired sporadically. They caused more terror than execution, as one commander put it. Still, no army felt complete without a few guns, even if they mostly served to make noise and smoke. King Charles I, short on arms and shorter on patience, spent months gathering an army. In August 1642, he raised his standard at Nottingham, casting aside all pretense. Civil war had begun. Parliament, meanwhile, had the advantage. They raised a larger army, bolstered by troops originally recruited to suppress rebellion in Ireland. London, a hotbed of Puritanism, supplied thousands of eager recruits. Commanding Parliament's forces was Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, a man better suited to committee meetings than cavalry charges. Known as Old Robin, Essex was cautious, indecisive, and famously unlucky. He had a knack for letting royalist forces slip between him and London, as happened at Edgehill, Newbury, and Cropredy Bridge. His personal life was equally tragic. His young wife cuckolded him, a fact that became battlefield gossip for both sides. The Midlands became the cockpit of war. In support of the king, the Earl of Northampton besieged Warwick Castle, but the effort was amateurish. The parliamentary garrison lifted the siege with minimal bloodshed. Still, the precedent was set. Across towns and villages, ugly little skirmishes flared up, growing in scale and ferocity. Rupert's cavalry was fast, fearless, and utterly undisciplined. He could drive enemies from the field but struggled to rally his men afterward. Once the charge was over, they scattered like confetti in a windstorm. Oliver Cromwell's Ironsides would later bring the discipline Rupert lacked, knowing that victory wasn't just about chasing the enemy, but holding the field. Still, Rupert led from the front, risking his life in ways later commanders wouldn't dare. His charisma, courage, and battlefield flair made him the poster boy of the royalist cause, a cavalier in every sense of the word. In the autumn of 1642, England's green fields were about to be painted red. The Battle of Edgehill, the first major clash of the English Civil War, was a swirling storm of cannon smoke, galloping horsemen, and confused infantry. At the heart of it all was Prince Rupert of the Rhine. Just 22 years old, commanding the royalist cavalry with the flair of a man twice his age, and the discipline of a man half it, Rupert had already made a name for himself a month earlier at Powick Bridge, where his cavalry surprised and routed parliamentarian horsemen. Though the skirmish was minor, it birthed the myth of the invincible cavalier horse, a belief that would haunt Parliament's commanders for months. On October 23rd, the Royalist and Parliamentarian armies met in the Vale of the Red Horse. Essex's army had the numbers, 12,000 infantry and 3,000 cavalry. But Rupert's cavalry was the soul of the Royalist force. 3,000 horsemen, 1,000 dragoons, and 10,000 infantry. The parliamentarians fired first. According to Ludlow, their general ordered 2 volleys at the section of the Royalist line where the king was rumored to be. Lord Wharton later claimed their artillery was far more effective than the Royalists, who did not kill even 20 men. Then came Rupert's moment. He galloped from wing to wing, issuing orders, keep ranks, swords in hand, no firing until contact. His men obeyed. The royalist cavalry advanced with all the gallantry and resolution imaginable, as James II would later recall. The parliamentarian cavalry panicked. Many fled without even engaging. Rupert's cavaliers pursued them for 7 miles toward Kyneton, scattering the enemy and plundering their baggage train. They seized Essex's coach, Sir Samuel Luke's commission, and a trove of supplies. But here lay Rupert's Achilles' heel. Instead of rallying his men to strike the remaining parliamentarian infantry, he let them chase loot and glory. The foot soldiers, especially Hawley's regiment, stood firm. One colonel even planted himself in the path of the fleeing cavalry and managed to rally 3 troops, who later proved crucial. Rupert's cavalry, now in disarray, couldn't return in time to support the infantry. The battle, which could have ended the war in a single afternoon, dissolved into confusion. Both sides withdrew. Edgehill was a draw, but it revealed the Royalists' greatest strength and their greatest weakness. On the left wing, Lord Wilmot faced tougher terrain, hedges, ditches, and musketeers. Yet he charged with determination, possibly timed with a discharge of all 6 Royalist guns. Despite being weaker than Rupert, Wilmot outnumbered Fielding's parliamentarian cavalry 3-1 and swept them from the field with even less resistance. Rupert's brilliance was undeniable. His courage, charisma, and tactical instincts made him the epitome of the cavalier. But his youth and lack of discipline meant that victory often slipped through his fingers. The war would grind on, and the myth of the invincible cavalier horse would soon be shattered by Cromwell's Ironsides, who knew that winning the field was only half the battle. As the parliamentarian foot regiment of Sir William Fairfax broke ranks and fled, one man outpaced them all, Lieutenant Thomas Whitney. He didn't just run, he commandeered a horse and galloped post-haste to London, likely shouting, "We're doomed," all the way. His urgent ride would be the first whisper of chaos to reach the capital. With the cavalry having swept the field, it was now the turn of the Royalist infantry to decide the day. At their head stood Sir Jacob Astley, who famously knelt and prayed, "O Lord, thou knowest how busy I must be this day. If I forget thee, do not thou forget me." Then, rising to his feet, he cried, "March on, boys," and led the foot forward. According to James II, they advanced with a slow, steady pace and a very daring resolution. A parliamentarian soldier later recalled how the Royalist foot came up all in front, charging gallantly after a brief exchange of cannon fire. Morale was high. The Royalist infantry had seen their cavalry rout the enemy, and the brigade of Charles Essex had disbanded without striking a blow. Now, Astley's brigades met the parliamentarian foot in a brutal push of pike. As Clarendon later wrote, "The foot of both sides stood their ground with great courage. The execution was great on both sides, but much greater on the Earl of Essex's party." 7 parliamentarian regiments, some 6,000 men, faced off against 10,000 Royalist foot. Pikemen formed hedgehog-like formations, flanked by musketeers struggling to break the enemy line. But after hours of bloodshed, something extraordinary happened. As if by mutual consent, both sides unlocked ranks, stepped back, and continued firing sporadically until nightfall. One eyewitness called it a thing so very extraordinary that only the sheer number of witnesses made it believable. With the Royalist foot exhausted, the initiative passed to the few parliamentarian cavalry who hadn't fled. Lieutenant General Sir William Balfour rallied them and launched a furious assault on Colonel Richard Fielding's brigade. They broke through a regiment with green colors, seized the cannons, and sent the Royalist centre streaming back toward Edgehill. Meanwhile, the King's Lifeguard was locked in combat with Constable's regiment. Sir Edmund Verney, the Knight Marshal who bore the King's banner, was struck down by Ensign Arthur Young, who snatched the standard from his lifeless hand. But Young's triumph lasted mere minutes. Captain Smith, wounded but resolute, galloped up shouting, "Traitor! Deliver the standard!" He killed one Roundhead, wounded another, and reclaimed the banner. The King's standard had been in parliamentarian hands for just 6 minutes. As darkness fell, both armies, starved, bleeding, and within cannon shot, settled down for a night as cold as a banker's handshake. Neither side had won. The Royalists had the advantage, but failed to press it. Essex withdrew to Warwick Castle, leaving the road to London open. Prince Rupert, ever impetuous, urged a dash to seize the capital. But the king hesitated, hoping for peace. That hesitation cost him dearly. By the time he reached Turnham Green, Parliament had mustered a force too large to confront. The king withdrew to Oxford, which became the royalist capital for the next 4 years. He would never reach London again, except as a prisoner. The battle was a chaotic mess of cannon blasts, cavalry charges, and pikemen forming forests of steel. Rupert's cavalry smashed through Parliament's horsemen but got so carried away chasing loot that they left their infantry exposed. Essex's foot soldiers counterattacked, and by nightfall both sides were bloodied, exhausted, and confused. Around 1,000 men lay dead, and neither side could claim victory. The war would rage for another 9 years. Next up, the Battle of Marston Moor. If you enjoyed this tale of mischances and battlefield drama, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling chapter in our journey through history. More intrigue, more battles, and more unforgettable characters await.